So for today's video, we're going to be talking about immersion. This is a relatively common topic that you'll see in tabletop role-playing game videos across YouTube. And we want to get into the subject a little bit deeper than the usual. I'm going to give you a definition. It's my definition. There's a range of definitions. All these things are true. We want to look at an article by Sarah Lynn Bowman called Immersion and Shared Imagination in Role-Playing Games, and kind of get into a discussion about there being 6 different types of immersion, and that these things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and that for most players, for most game sessions, there will be a range of these 6 different types of immersion that are overlapping and potentially varying throughout even the individual session. So I've not made a secret in past videos. I'm not a fan of some forms of immersion, and I think I've made it pretty clear in a number of those videos that what I'm actually talking about is when you're so absorbed into your own experience, be that your own character and how they fit into the world, or just your own experience, that it forms a detriment because you lack awareness of what's going on with the other players and even the game master in terms of generating this shared imagined space. And yes, there should be some collaborative creation of that world, but for some of us, we prefer a world that feels as if, in quotation marks, it could be real. And so what we want to do, though, is start off. We're going to do a few things in the video. We're going to start off with a few principles, and these will relate to the typical talking points that you have, where we open up with a disclaimer that says, there's no wrong way to play these games as long as you're enjoying yourself with other people around a table. You're doing it the right way, and I, firmly believe that. And I chose the two principles that we're going to present here first from out of this article, but I think they apply pretty much to every video I've made so far and will continue to make into the future. And then after that, we're going to move to some concepts that are related to the idea about immersion in tabletop role-playing games, but are not immersion itself. And then finally, we'll get into talking about the 6 different types of immersion and discuss some ways in which they overlap and form part of a continuum.
The first principle will be establishing useful ways to frame various immersive experiences is important, as is avoiding privileging one mode of role-playing immersion over another. And that leads to our second principle, which will be debates about the nature of immersion often become unproductive when players feel the need to defend their preferred experiential modes or establish their gaming styles as superior.
So the point that I hope to have made with those 2 principles that will guide this discussion, and hopefully all future discussions for at least these types of videos where we're discussing the larger concepts at play within tabletop role-playing games, is that I think sometimes we get so caught up in the ways that we prefer because we know ourselves, we know what we're all looking for from our own games. And once we've found that, that begins to seem like that is the right and proper way to approach tabletop role-playing games. And you want to, by extension, help other people to find that way that works for you. However, that may not be what suits them and their needs best. And so to try and get beyond those allegiances and those biases towards particular approaches, particular modalities of immersion, as we might put it by the end of the video, we want to take a step back and look at the broader spectrum of approaches to play and accept the validity of other styles genuinely. I mean, if you can always say that, well, yeah, that's, every way is right, but, we all know my way is the best, then ultimately the discussion is not going to bear the kind of fruits that we would hope for. And what we end up doing is just sort of preaching to the choir. We're talking about the ways that we assume are the best ways, and the people that are the most receptive to that discussion then will be the people who also approach games in the similar way. So one last thing that I want to point out before we move into the video proper, and that is the way I've constructed these slides. So if you take the time to follow the links down in the description of the video, you'll see that I've linked to a manuscript version of this chapter. The last time I looked, the book itself was going for like $200 or a little short thereof. And that's probably a little cost prohibitive for most people to read one chapter in a book if they're not also engaged in some sort of ludic study or designing a game themselves or that sort of thing. It is a quality book and all the chapters are very good, but Dr. Bowman has made a manuscript copy available, and I'm also going to provide a link to her website. You can look at some of her other publications and other things she's been involved with. She's actually a good source. An interesting foundation for discussions that we might have together in the future. So that takes me to the part about how these slides are constructed. If you follow the links that I put to the manuscript down below and read that chapter for yourself, then what you're going to see is I've actually taken a lot of direct quotations and put them on the individual slides. Now, having said that, as part of my interpretation of the reading, I have pulled sentences and phrases from various parts of the chapter and put them together on the slide to facilitate what I think is a good continuity of presentation of the ideas put forth in the chapter. So that kind of begs the question, why are we just dealing with quotes taken from a reading with some of my interpretation added on that you'll hear within the slide? So if it's not written on the slide, it's probably something that I'm adding on as a personal thought. But really the idea here is I hope that what happens is that facilitates us all being able to take that step back from our own preferred approaches to tabletop role-playing games, which I think, those allegiances that we form over the years of gaming and gaming with others who perhaps see the hobby in similar ways to ourselves, or at least having the most satisfying gaming sessions when we're playing with other people who want similar things from these games as ourselves. That makes it so difficult to see the possibility that maybe the wants and needs of other people are just as valid, even if the way they approach gaming seems radically different than our own. In my case, it's that I like these very rich, deep worlds that seem as if they could possibly exist, and to me that's more important than coming up with narration in the moment. Or for a lot of other people, that's the character and the narrative that they collaboratively develop while they're sitting around the table as they go. And that's actually what they find fulfilling, and that's fine too. And sort of all these steps in between, and neither the people who are looking for entirely other things, potentially just the fun of sitting around the table rolling dice with other people and enjoying a night's camaraderie and a little gaming on the side.
The related concepts we will discuss are flow, engagement, involvement, absorption, transportation, presence, engrossment, and the last one that we won't really focus on in this video will be dissociation, which we'll touch on only briefly. Flow is described as a mental state of full involvement, focus, and enjoyment in the process of an activity. The nature of the activity is important in that it should be intrinsically rewarding, but also require a balance between skill and challenge. Now, colloquially, this is referred to as being in the zone. So, time of year, maybe we use it as a basketball reference. If somebody's making all their shots from every part of the floor every time they try, then you say they're in the zone. Engagement, then, is a term that tries to capture the sense of being motivated and involved with an activity, cognitively, emotionally, and physically. In a gaming context, an example might be leveling or grinding as repetitive activities to advance the power of a character. Notably, there need be no inherent skill required or obvious challenge, just a holistic involvement on the part of the player. The downside is that if the player's sense of engagement fades or fails completely, then a sense of burnout may begin to replace the sense of engagement with an activity. Involvement refers more to social modes of engagement than non-social ones. This includes immersion through identification with the brand. So if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, think about all the different, now WotC, Hasbro, or previously TSR products that go with the brand name of Dungeons and Dragons, and identifying yourself as a Dungeons and Dragons players as opposed to other more generic or less known brands of role-playing game. Engrossment is based on Gary Allen Fine's 1983 work. This is the willing, temporary acceptance of a fantasy world and persona as real, indicating this process as a necessary component to playing. Transportation emphasizes the importance of narrative as a vehicle for transporting the mind to another time and place. Transportation may be a stimulating factor that leads to absorption by inviting engagement with stories. Presence, then, refers to the illusion that a mediated experience is not mediated, the feeling of being there or something virtual that feels real. So typically we are connected to our characters through the character sheet. We are connected to their actions through the dice that we roll. We are connected to the game and game world by the creations of the company or the game master or all of the players in collaboration, and also then the rules of the game. And so the last of the related concepts that we'll discuss is really going to be absorption, although we'll touch, as I said, briefly on the relationship to dissociation. Absorption is somewhat like flow in the sense of representing a holistic investment in an activity cognitively, emotionally, and physically. It differs in that it does not necessarily entail an intrinsic requirement of skill or presenting a challenge. Dissociation goes beyond the bounds of this video. However, absorption could be described as a similar but non-pathological state wherein the person remains capable of performing important tasks while still holistically engaged with the fantasy. Before we get started with laying out the different types of immersion, I want to provide a quick definition following Sarah Lynn Bowman's typology as presented in the article we're discussing. And for the purposes of this video, we will define immersion as the psychological experience of heightened attention while participating in a fictional game reality by enacting a role. And these different types of immersion that we'll discuss are not mutually exclusive, often overlapping, varying from session to session, and existing with multiple intensities. As for the actual types of intensity that we'll be discussing for the rest of the video, we're going to break immersion into activity, into game, into environment, into narrative, into character, and into community. By immersion into activity, we mean getting caught up in the physicality of playing the game, the rolling of dice, the pulling of cards, and even in acting out or emulating the physical actions of the characters that we're playing within the game. In short, the tactile and haptic investments into the game, especially when these physical actions are repeated with regularity. Bowman suggests that immersion into activity has the strongest connection to the achievement of flow states during play. Other researchers have termed this spatial motor immersion, or more broadly, tactical immersion. Immersion in a game can be simply stated as the willingness to strive toward the game's goal using only the methods prescribed by its rules. Where the immersion is challenge-based, it encompasses strategic thinking, cognition, and problem-solving through the use of rules knowledge. However, even at the tactical level, problem-solving, such as puzzle solutions and resource management, are part of what might be termed ludic involvement or cerebral immersion. Immersion into environment involves exploring the different aspects of an alternate game world, whether these characteristics are physical, mental, or virtual. In connection with the related concept of presence, for some players, the more realistic the setting becomes, the more immersion players will experience. In the terms of creative agendas, from the big model, Immersion into environment should be most strongly associated with simulationism. Some researchers have termed this spatial immersion, since the immersive qualities are drawn from the sensation of moving around in real time through a posited setting which feels as though it could possibly exist. And of course, this is something that I've alluded to in other videos as probably the strongest form of immersion for me personally in the way I approach tabletop role-playing games. Narrative immersion, sometimes termed emotional immersion, is obtained by responding to the events that characters are part of during the unfolding narrative structure. And that's Bowman quoting Stefan Bjork from a different article. And is a term that also emphasizes the importance of character enactment. These systems often emphasize the co-creative potential of role-playing, distributing narrative control of various parts of the game world to the players. Games that prominently emphasize this type of immersion will often use procedures and game rules as serious reward systems in sculpting narrative and creativity. And that's Bowman quoting Evan Turner and William J. White from a third article. And also, according to Bowman, this is most strongly connected to the related concept of transportation, so being transported to that other world. Immersion into character is also sometimes called emotional immersion and refers to the experience of enacting a character. However, here the emphasis is on the emotional connection to the character within the narrative. The character can be a thin veneer or one-dimensional social role, similar to the concept of a persona in terms of players performing an expected function in society rather than a complex identity. A role may simply be a change of perspective rather than another personality. In other instances, characters are experienced as complex, distinct individuals with goals, feelings, and psychological complexes that are separate from the players, although information flows between the two. To continue a bit with immersion into character, much as was said of immersion into narrative, it is frequently associated with the related concept of transportation. And as a final note here, the experiences and thoughts of characters, particularly when character perspectives are presented in the first person, can facilitate as deep a transportation affect and basis for engagement as the connection to the story through narrative. As role-playing involves a first-person audience with characters enacted by the players themselves, this form of identification can become heightened, a desirable state for many players. And the information flow between character and player can be referred to as bleed. With immersion into community, finally, we have immersion as a social state that takes into account both the interaction the players are having within the game and also the cooperation, competition, and the relative co-presence of sharing the game-playing experience with others. And I say relative co-presence because today we have to take into account sort of virtual gaming and online gaming through various virtual tabletops, that sort of thing, but with others in a group. We might consider these separately as social immersion and even inter-immersion, respectively. While inter-immersion best explains social gaming related to character, narrative, and environmental enactment, group flow may help explain how players sync together in the overall experience of play. Further, it emphasizes the ability of players to draw one another into deeper states of immersion through portrayals of character. All right, so let's wrap this up by saying that in the context of immersion in the community, we might introduce two new related concepts that are specific to this type of immersion. The first will be fellowship, referring to enjoying time with members of the playgroup, and the second being leadership, feeling that one's contributions to the game were valued by the other members of the playgroup. And conversely, when players are individually pursuing their own creative agendas, then strife and even schisms can develop within the playgroup. Thus, it is important to be aware of all these modes of immersion and attempt to design games to include a variety of immersive states. And, to that I'll add not just designing game rule sets, but also designing the features and adventures and scenarios and encounters of your home game with a mind towards stimulating different types of immersive states.
Well, that about wraps it up for me in this video. I think I've discussed as much as I wanted to from the article. Hopefully you'll get a chance to read it, and I would really love it if it generated some discussion. I know the comment section for YouTube isn't necessarily the greatest for an ongoing dialogue with other people, but it certainly helps the channel to show some sort of activity and interaction from the audience. Uh, so please do that, like, subscribe, all those fun things. Um, Now, just I know it's been a while since I've done a proper video, and I'd kind of fallen behind with a lot of the ones that I planned. I've certainly got more video ideas than I've got time or inclination to produce the videos, at least for now. Um, well, I'm still developing my video production skill set. I did want to say though that like the next video that I kind of worked on already in terms of preparing what I wanted to say is about the process model as applied to tabletop role playing games, which comes from some Finnish researchers and was published as part of a LARP conference as a book chapter or a conference proceedings chapter. And I don't know that this constitutes a series because it really kind of goes to or speaks to how I like to think about tabletop role playing games just in general from the more academic or scholarly side of things. It just fits my background as a social scientist. I think a lot of times I see that a lot of the commentary in terms of uh, tabletop role playing games practices and theories and philosophies are coming from people who have a background in the arts, which is great. But I definitely see things from a different point of view, although I think there's a lot of overlap between all of us within the disciplines of the humanities. I don't want to make it seem like I am privileging that scholarly or academic approach. It's certainly like much like the form of tabletop gaming that I enjoy. It's just sort of my nature and how I like to think about things. And of course, I'm applying that to how I think about tabletop role playing games. But that doesn't mean that other ways of considering and discussing approaches to tabletop role playing games aren't also valid, much as different play styles are valid. Anyway, I thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll hope to see you again at the next one.